my name is Lisa Hudgens, and I am the Director of Placement and part of the Placement and Career Development Office here at Logan College. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about interviewing. It's one of my favorite topics that I get to discuss, simply because interviews are an opportunity for you to get in and shine. And if you've made it to the interview phase, that means that you've done everything else perfect. You've done the cover letter, you've done the application, you've done the resume, you've gone through the whole process, and now this is an opportunity for you to get in to kind of show yourself and show your skills and your strengths, and kind of gives you an opportunity to get in and see the employer for the first time too. So even though I know a lot of people are get a little nervous about interviews, it really isn't a time to get nervous. And I say that because before I get started, I try to tell students one thing. When we go in for an interview, we do have a tendency to get very nervous. And we get very nervous because we think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be talking to 2 or 3 people. They're going to be looking at me. They're going to be judging me. They're going to be trying to decide if I'm the right candidate. I have to be careful what I say. I've got to try to think of the appropriate answers. And you've got all this going on. But you know what? We're nervous, but I can guarantee you that employers are equally nervous, because they're trying to think of the right questions to ask. They're trying to think of the appropriate answers for your questions. They're trying to make a good impression, because it's not just about them wanting you, it's about you wanting them. So when you go in for that interview, yes, they're going to be interviewing you, but you need to keep in mind, this is my opportunity to interview them. Up until this point, I thought that they were good business. I've wanted to work here, but now's the opportunity for me to get in there, get some of my questions answered, hear what they have to say, maybe even get a chance to take a look at the facility. It's going to be my decision too. Yes, it's going to be their decision if they offer me the job, but it's going to be my decision if I accept. So sometimes I think if you can keep that in mind, it kind of puts everybody on the same footing, kind of common ground, and kind of helps make that interview experience a little bit easier. When you go into interview, though, I think it's important to keep one thing in mind. And employers, when they're talking to you, when they're trying to decide if you're a viable candidate or a viable applicant, they're going to be making a lot of their decisions based on 4 areas. And those 4 areas are technical skills, communication skills, appearance, and attitude. And they have assigned a percentage to each of those areas. And the very first one I said was technical skills. We've just completed a 1-year certificate, maybe a 2-year associate, maybe a 4-year bachelor's, maybe something beyond a bachelor's. So we're feeling pretty good about ourselves. And we're thinking all this technical skills that we have and what we can do for the employer. But employer, 10% of their overall decision is based on your technical skills. Most employers feel that if you've got the basic knowledge, they can train you to do the rest. So having those skills are very, very important, but it's not the part of the big picture that they're looking at either. Because they're looking at an entire package. So yes, you need the technical skills, but they're also looking at your communication skills. Can you speak? Can you write? And they've had an opportunity to take a look at your written communication skills based on your cover letter and maybe some of the other information that you've had to submit. In the interview, they're going to be listening to your communication skills. Can you communicate? Can you interact with them? Can you interact with the committee? How do you interact with the committee? So 25% of their decision is going to be based on your communication skills. 25% is going to be based on your overall appearance. Are you dressed appropriately? Are you neat? Are you clean? And that's the total package. That's just not your clothes. They're going to be looking at your hair. We live in an age where there's a lot of body piercings and a lot of tattooings, Are those body piercings and tattoos, are they covered? So they're going to be looking at the overall appearance, Do you look like somebody that can come in and work with the rest of my staff? But 40% of their decision is going to be based on your attitude. Did you show any enthusiasm? When you walked through the door, when you met with the secretary, when you met with them for the first time, did you smile? Did you introduce yourself? Was there enthusiasm in your appearance? Was there enthusiasm in your tone? Did they get the feeling that you could come in and work with the rest of the group of the people that they have? because it's all about attitude. Are you going to be able to get along with coworkers? Are you going to be able to get along with supervisors? Do I think you're going to be able to get along with my customers or my clients? These are the questions that employers are going to be asking themselves. So again, when they're looking at that overall candidate, they're looking at 10% technical skills, 25% communication skills, 25% appearance, 40% attitude. So it's the entire package. It's not just your skills, it's just not your appearance, it's just not your communications, it's the entire package. When you go in for an interview, you need to be prepared. You need to have researched the company. If you go in and you have a successful interview, you can not only command a higher salary. Most employers expect there to be some negotiation with the salary, unless of course there's a certain union wage or something that they're, prohibited by. But a lot of times when you go in, if you've got the skills, if you've got the attitude, if you were prepared for the interview, and if they want you, a lot of times employers are willing to negotiate. So you could command, if your interview goes well, you can sometimes command a higher salary, definitely create higher expectations. Maybe they're thinking about bringing you in at an entry-level position. You come in based on what you had to say, based on what you were able, the questions you were able to answer. Maybe they think, I really think this person could actually handle this position. So sometimes it means a higher level position moving into. They're going to try to determine how well you're going to fit into their overall organization. Do you seem like a team player? Do you seem like someone that I say that will come in and play with us? Or are you going to be one of those people that wants to bring in your own toys and gets mad if somebody else tries to play with those toys? Most employers are looking for people who can work with other people, who can be part of a team. The interviewer is going to try to find out what kind of person you are, if you are a team player, and how you can benefit the company. And they're going to do this through a series of questions. Again, keep in mind, they're interviewing you, but you better be interviewing them too. Because you're going to hopefully walk away from the interview knowing if this is a job that I would really be happy at. Think about it. Most of us work 8 to 9 hours a day. I know it's an 8-hour day, but sometimes by the time you overtime or whatever, you're there a little bit longer. So is this somewhere that I could walk into every day, Monday through Friday, from 8 to 5, and be perfectly happy or perfectly content? After meeting with the supervisor, after meeting with some of the people who might be my coworkers, after seeing maybe where I'm going to be housed, is this a job that I would really want? Are they going to be able to use my skills? Are they going to be able to, is the salary what I thought it was going to be? These are all things that you need to be trying to gather from that interview too. So it's not all about the interviewer, it's about you as well too. When you go in and you meet with an employer is going to take a look at you very quickly and determine probably within the first 10 to 15 seconds if you're a viable candidate. And you think, well, that's not very much time. How can they do that in 10 to 15 seconds? But stop and think about yourself. When you walk into a class for the first time, when you walk into a social gathering, is it not human nature to kind of look at somebody, size them up, and you can kind of figure out if this is somebody that you think you're going to be able to get along with or work with or sit next to for an entire semester, and employer is no different. And there's things that we can do as an applicant that can help make that 10 to 15 seconds more successful. Some of the things that you need to do immediately when you walk in is, it goes back to what our mom said, remember your posture, make sure your shoulders are back. Walk in with your head up. Walk in with a smile on your face. I don't care what kind of drive you had coming over. I don't care how many times you got honked at or who was texting and ran you off the road. Put all that behind you. Walk in with a smile. Shake their hand. Hello, my name is. And it needs to be a nice, firm handshake. Nothing wimpy, nothing half-hearted. Because if you're going to do that, you might as well not shake their hand at all. Watch your eye contact. Be polite, courtesy, or be polite to the receptionist when you first meet them. Everybody that you come in contact, you need to have a smile for. Also, the other thing, and it's kind of difficult to do, is when you first walk in and you've made the introductions, the first thing I want to do, because I feel way more comfortable when I'm sitting in a chair, is to hurry up and sit down. But that's the worst thing to do in an interview. You typically need to wait for the employer to invite you to be seated. Simply because maybe they're not going to conduct the interview in their office. Maybe they're going to conduct the interview down at the break room. Maybe they're going to conduct the interview in their conference room. Maybe they're going to conduct the interview in somebody else's office. So wait to be seated until you're asked to be seated. Now, if the and that's assuming that the employers have the manners too. Sometimes they may or may not. So if you come in, you make your introduction, you know, you speak to the employer, you let them know who you are, nice firm handshake, and they sit down, and it's obvious that the interview is beginning, and they've not invited you to have a seat, then by all means, go ahead and sit down. But just don't hurry up and rush into the office and sit down. Wait to be asked to be seated. And these are just a few of the things that you can do in the first 10 to 15 seconds to make that a better first impression. An interview is no different than a test. It's no different than anything else. You can actually break down the phases of an interview so that you can kind of practice and prepare for them. The first thing before you go in for an interview is you've got to handle pre-interview impressions. And pre-interview impressions actually begin way before the interview, because you've had contact with that person at some point, either through email or telephone or something, because they've had to have been able to contact you somehow. So pre-interview impressions. And this is, and I know if, I've talked about this before in my resume workshop, I'm going to talk to you again about it in the interview workshop. Pre-interview impressions, that actually starts with the very first contact the employer has of you. If that very first contact is a cell phone number or a land phone number, and they've had to leave you a message, go back and make sure that that message that they've left, or that you have your voicemail message, is something very professional. Don't have music blaring, don't have jokes. The one that kind of gets me is one that makes me think that I'm actually talking to the person, and all of a sudden I say, oh, got you, I'm not really here. Don't have any of those. Those are fine when you're not interviewing, when you're not looking for a job, but that's part of the pre-interview impression. So make sure that your voicemail is something appropriate and professional. Same thing with your email address. Employers, a lot of times, more often than not, will say, when they list a job with us, they'll say, Lisa, just have the student email their resume to me. Well, when you email their resume, your resume to them, and then they respond back to that email address, you really don't want them to be responding back to Chicky Baby or I'm trying to think, Glitter Princess or Superman or Superwoman or Superhero. It needs to be a professional email address. These are pre-interview impressions. And trust me, employers do know them. And I know they know them because they've called me and they have asked me to ask students to change their voicemails before they called them because they didn't care for the loud rap music. So I know that they notice them. So that's part of the pre-interview impression. The other thing is when they do call you, make sure that once they call you to set up that interview, if they've not emailed it to you, that you have pen and paper in hand and that you get the information down. You'll want to make sure that you know the time of the interview. You want to make sure you know the place of the interview, the date, convenient parking. It's okay to ask them when they call to set up the interview, can you please tell me who I might be interviewing with or who will be interviewing me at that time? It's so much nicer to have a name before you go in as opposed to getting in and maybe meeting half a dozen people. So it's always a good idea when they call to set up that interview, just ask them it. And they might not know at that time, and that's okay, but if they do, you can go ahead and have the names written down. Ask for directions. Ask for the telephone number. Sometimes things happen. I was on my way to a meeting with an employer at Mount Vernon a couple years ago, and there's a really bad accident on 57, and it was right past the West Frankfort exit, and I had just passed the West Frankfort exit and was stuck on 57 for almost 2.5 hours. Totally outside of my control. Luckily, I had the employer's number. I was able to call, explain what had happened, and asked if I could reschedule, and they were more than happy. Don't take it upon yourself that if there is something like that that happens, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes and you think, oh, no big deal, I'll still go ahead and show up. Call them and let them know that if it was traffic, if it was construction, whatever it was, that you're going to be delayed, and is it all right to go ahead and come in, or should you reschedule? Because depending on the employer, they might have the interview set up pretty closely back to back, so you don't want to make that assumption. Give the employer a phone call. get their phone number when they call, and ask who you need to call in case there is a problem. You can also ask length of the interview. You know, can you tell me approximately how long this interview might last? You know, a lot of times they have that information, and that's something I kind of like to know is how much time do I need to allot, especially when I was interviewing, and sometimes I'd try to schedule a couple interviews on the same day, and especially if there's a little bit of drive time, I kind of wanted to know how long I was going to be here in order not to be late for the next one. So these are some of the things that you need to do, and this is part of handling the pre-interview impressions. The other thing is research the organization. I cannot stress this enough. You guys have computers at your access, or you've got computers, you've got the internet. If you are going to go to apply for a company, you've got to know something about that company. I'm not saying that you have to know their entire history, but you know, what kind of products they sell, what services do they make, how long have they been there, how many employees do they have right now. You can Google almost any single employer and get this background information. Because I'll tell you what, if you go into the interview and the very first question out of that employer's mouth is, why do you want to work for us? Or how do you think our company can utilize your skills? If you don't know anything about the company, you've not done your homework, you're not going to be able to answer those questions, and that interview is, for all intents and purposes, going to be over. And with today's computers and internet, you've got access to that information. Do your research. Know something about the company. Trust me, employers note that. And they would rather talk to somebody that has done their homework, that can talk about their company, because it shows an interest on your part. It already shows some initiation on your part. You've taken the time to do that. So you already have kind of a heads up on maybe some of the other applicants who have not taken the time to do that. So do your research. If you don't get anything else out of this, get that. Do your research. Know something about that company. Getting to and waiting for the interview. If your interview starts at 2 o'clock, you need to be there probably 10 to 15 minutes prior to 2 o'clock. Don't get there an hour early. Don't get there 30 minutes early or 40 minutes early. That's way too much time. Get there 10 to 15 minutes. That gives you a chance to catch your breath, to sit in the waiting room, to make sure everything's button zipped, your hair's okay, everything's that you're ready for this interview. If your interview starts at 2 o'clock and you get there at 2 o'clock, you're already late, because chances are the employer's already waiting for you. So 10 to 15 minutes prior to the interview start date is when you need to arrive. Now, if it's in another city and you've allowed a little extra time and you do show up maybe 30 or 40 minutes early, that's okay, but just hang out in the car. Just take a couple deep breaths, just go over your resume again, make sure you're familiar with all the information. Just again, make sure your hair's combed and that everything, your appearance is as it should be. And then just, like I said, hang out in the car until about 10 minutes before, and then go ahead and walk into the employer's office. Like I said, you really don't want to get there too early. Opening moves. We've already talked about this, first impressions. I mean, that old saying, you never have a second chance to make a first impression, it's true. So when you walk in, make sure that your shoulders are back, you're smiling, you've got good eye contact, you've extended your hand, hello, my name is. Make sure it's a good 10 to 15 seconds. And you know, that's not silly as it sounds, it's something that you can practice. You can practice it, you know, with someone in your house, you can practice it with a student. That's part of what we do in the Placement Career Development Office. We do mock interviews if students request them, kind of put you through what you can expect or anticipate, so you can practice any part of this interview process. Establishing the relationships. I said earlier that we're nervous because they're looking at us, they're asking us questions, we're having to try to think of answers. You know, we're all kind of nerved out. Are they going to offer the job? Are they not going to offer the job? I can guarantee you a lot of times the employers are nervous too. They've got a lot riding on this hire. You know, they have to hire the right candidate. If they don't, you know, they're going to have to go through the interviewing process again, or the advertising process, which is a costly process, time consuming, because they're going to have to go through all the applications again. It's, you know, so, you know, if they don't hire the right candidate and you turn around and you leave, or you can't get along with coworkers, you know, that's going to cause kind of a dishevel in their organization. So kind of, we're all about make me comfortable, make me feel good that I'm here. You can do a little of that for the employer too, and sometimes it's as easy as, if you walk into his room, maybe he's got a big picture window and it's a beautiful day. It might be a comment like, gosh, isn't it gorgeous outside today? I'm so tired of the rain and the sunshine really looks nice. Or maybe you notice on his walls that there's a lot of Cardinal paraphernalia. Say, oh my gosh, you're a big Cardinal fan. Now, if you're a big Cub fan, you don't want to say, oh my gosh, how can you be a Cardinal fan? You don't want to do anything to insult them, but, oh, I see you must be a Cardinal fan. Nothing long, nothing lengthy, nothing 15 minutes, just something short. Give them an opportunity to kind of catch their breath and give them an opportunity to kind of get comfortable. And that goes back to that communications skills too. You've got enough communication skills in you that you can kind of recognize and kind of do that. And that's part of that process too. So kind of keep that in mind. So opening moves, your first impressions, establishing a relationship, and then the interview itself, the dreaded moment. And like I said, to me, the interview is the best part, because this isn't a time where you've been able to practice, you should have done your homework, you should be prepared, and this is really an opportunity for you to shine, for you to show the employer why they should hire you over the other 4 or 5 applicants. So the interview itself, in today's environment, it might not be unusual for you to interview 3 or 4 people. I know somebody who interviewed and there were 10 other people in the interview room, and it was kind of like a half moon table, and the applicant sat here and then 10 people sat around the room. And what's difficult about that is that even though maybe just 1 or 2 people are asking the questions, you have to engage everybody in that interview process. That goes back to that communication skill. So you just can't maintain eye contact with those 1 or 2 people. You have to make sure that you respond and that you talk to everybody. So again, sometimes that takes a little bit, sometimes that's kind of a little bit unnerving because we got 3 or 4, or maybe 10 people staring at us. But if you just kind of look at each individual person, it does help. So just keep that kind of in mind. But employers have certain expectations when you come in as an interviewee or as the applicant. An employer's expectations is they expect you to be dressed professionally. They expect your paperwork should have been done correctly, or probably you would not even be to the interview stage. And your paperwork your resume, your cover letter, your application, you have appropriate interview behavior. And when I say appropriate interview behavior, you didn't bring your cell phone in, you didn't bring your headphones in, you don't have, your iPod draped around your neck, you don't have your phone going off or buzzing, you're not sitting there shaking your leg, you're not there crossing your leg and swinging your leg back and forth, you're not playing with your hair. We interviewed a person once years ago that sat there and played with a rubber band the whole time until the rubber band slipped from his hands and perfect arched and landed right on the employer's desk. Appropriate interview behavior. You're sitting there, it's okay to use hand gestures, we all do. Actually that helps show some enthusiasm, but you don't want exaggerated hand gestures, and you don't want to be pacing, and you don't want to be swiveling. So appropriate interview behavior. They expect you to have good verbal communication skills. They expect you to be able to carry on a conversation with more than yes, no answers. They're going to expect that if they call that in your prior jobs or school you've had good attendance, that they're going to expect that you're wanting to come to work for them, so that you're going to want to stay a reasonable time. And that reasonable time has changed. When I graduated, statistics said that I would have 3 to 5 jobs in my lifetime. And then it went 5 to 7. I read not too long ago, and I think it was 13 to 15 jobs in students' lifetimes now. To me, that seems a lot of jobs. But, so it might change. So the reasonable time has changed. Reasonable to an employer might be, if I can keep you for 3 to 5 years, I'm good to go. Knowing that at that time, if I don't have something of more substance to offer you, you might move on or go somewhere else. So, but for right now, if I hire you, I should expect you not to want to leave it within 6 months. I should be able to expect that you will be dependable in getting things done, that you have either the job-related skills or the previous experience to do my position. I should expect that any information that you've given me to this point, up until this point, is accurate and factual information, that you have not misrepresented any of your skills or qualifications. So those are some of the employer's expectations in the interview. When you go in for an interview, naturally the employer is going to have questions, and those questions might vary. Some of the more traditional questions might be, tell me about yourself. Now you gotta be careful here, because that's kind of one of those open-ended questions. Tell me about yourself. Our first response, especially if we're nervous, okay, tell me about myself. I'm married, I've got 2 daughters, both in college. So right away I've given the employer more information than he probably wants, and more information than I needed to. Because I can assure you, he didn't want to know that I was married, that I had 2 daughters, and that I was both in college. Tell me about yourself. You know, I've been employed at John A. Logan College for a number of years. My current position is Director of Job Placement. I really like the position because it gives me an opportunity to work with the employers in our district, but it also gives me an opportunity to work with students and helping them prepare for the job market. Tell me about yourself. They're looking for work-related information. They're looking for something specific to the job that you're applying for, not personal information. What position are you applying for? How do you spend your spare time? Tell me a little bit about your degree. Tell me a little bit about your previous work experience in this field. These are some pretty traditional questions, and don't probably require a lot of thought on your part because they're questions we're used to seeing. But employers are starting to move back to a process that's called behavioral-based. Behavioral-based is not something that's new. It's been around for a long time. Behavioral-based questions, typically, the premise behind behavioral-based questions is how you handled a situation in the past is a good indication of how you'll handle a similar situation in the future. So instead of, you know, just tell me about yourself or tell me about your education, these questions are a little bit longer in nature. So they're going to require you to do a little bit more thinking on your part, which sometimes requires a little bit more quiet time, which sometimes, for whatever reason, we think that we need to be constantly talking in the interview. And with behavioral-based questions, that's not possible, because you have to actually think of a certain situation, formulate your thought, and then actually discuss it with the employer. And some examples of behavioral-based questions might be, describe an instance when you had to think on your feet to extract yourself from a difficult situation. So, okay, first you have to think of the time that you had a difficult situation, how you had to get yourself out of it, and when. And it doesn't always have to be work-related. It could be school-related. If you've been a member of a club or an organization, you could pull that into it. It doesn't, so some people kind of get hung up and think, oh my gosh, I don't have a work-related experience that I can relate it to. It doesn't have to be work-related. Like I said, it can be, you know, club or extracurricular or, you know, volunteer experience. Other questions is, give me a specific example of a time when you use good judgment and logic in solving a problem. How do you determine priorities in scheduling your time? Give examples. I mean, when you stop and think about that, all of you are currently in school. I'm going to guess that some of you are working as well, maybe part-time, maybe some even closer to full-time, maybe some full-time, and probably in addition to that, some of you have families. So how do you prioritize? You've got a lot going on right now. School, work, family. How do you prioritize? How do you get everything done? You know, is there a certain set or some kind of formula that you use to prioritize? Tell me about a time when you had to go above and beyond the call of duty in order to get a job done. Maybe that means, you know, well, one time, excuse me, I was supposed to leave work at 5 o'clock, but I knew a customer was coming in first thing in the morning and he was expected to have his project done. He had actually been waiting on it for a week. So I knew that I had to stay in later that night, or work a little bit later that night in order to get their project done and in order to get it done right, so that when the client hit the door at 8 a.m., his project would be waiting for him, so that he would come back to us then in the future. So, like I said, sometimes with behavioral-based questions, they're a little bit lengthier in nature, which is going to require us to think a little bit longer and to actually formulate our thoughts and then actually convey those thoughts to the employer. So, nice thing again, and I know I keep repeating the internet, but the internet has a wealth of information. You can actually go online, Google behavioral-based interview, and it'll pull up a series of questions. And that's the bad thing. I can't stand up here and say, when you go to apply for this employer or apply for this job, they're going to ask you this question, this question, this question, this question. I have no idea. I've got a pretty good idea, but I can't tell you specifically. But what you can do, you can go in and you can Google behavioral-based questions. You can Google traditional questions, and you can print them out. Once you get an idea of what the questions might look like and how you might formulate ideas, and a lot of them do seem to deal with setting priorities or scheduling time or resolving conflicts, things that you would encounter in a work environment, then you can kind of start formulating some ideas, and so you can have some responses. Not can, because there's no way you can memorize them, but you can have an idea of what some of those questions or some of those answers might be. So you can actually kind of practice. And the other nice thing is once you graduate and once you start interviewing in your field, you'll start seeing some of the same questions pop up over and over and over. So if you don't maybe nail it 100% today, chances are you'll have an opportunity to improve upon it and learn from the prior mistake, or learn how you could improve it or tweak it a little bit better, and do a better job of answering that the next time. So, that's another nice thing about an interview. You can learn from it. Every interview we go in, we can learn from. I think back to some of the interviews that I went on when I first graduated, and I know without a doubt everything that I did wrong in those interviews and how I could improve on them if I did it again. And that's the same thing for you. Once you start interviewing, you become more familiar with it. You get a little bit more accustomed to it. It really does get a little bit easier, even though you're dealing with different people. Now, these are some traditional questions. There are some questions that are kind of problem questions in nature. I hate to use problem questions or tough questions, but sometimes there's questions that employers might ask you because they're trying to elicit one response or another. And one we've already discussed, tell me about yourself. Make sure you relate it to education. But why do you want to leave your current job? Now, that's a very easy question if you want to leave your current job because you really have reached as far as you're going to be able to go, or maybe because that employer is not utilizing your skills. But what if you're leaving because you just don't get along with a supervisor? Or what if you're leaving just because you don't get along with a coworker? You've got to be very careful because you don't want to speak negatively at any time about anything within the interview, especially about an employer or a coworker or a supervisor. So you need to kind of think that through ahead of time. If you are currently working, that is a valid question that they might ask you. Why do you want to leave? And is it relevant? I've been there for 2 years, and I've yet to be able to apply any of the education that I went to school for. And when I read the advertisement in the paper and you said I would be doing this, that the applicant would be doing this, this, and this, that's exactly what I went to school for. Not, I just couldn't stand those people anymore. I just could not even begin to fathom the thought of going in there. Nothing critical. You need to look for the positive. What kind of people annoy you the most? And I can assure you, they really don't want to know what kind of people annoy you the most. They want to know if you're a team player, if you can get along, if you can play with the rest of the group. So, there again though, if you have worked with someone that is very annoying, someone has done something, it's human nature to hurry up and kind of spout that out. Take a second, think through your thoughts and how they're going to sound to the employer. 2 questions that throw people all the time are, tell me your greatest strengths. We don't think about our strengths. I don't have any strengths. We all have strengths. We just haven't thought about them in those terms. Tell me what your greatest weakness is. We don't like to admit our weaknesses. And if I admit my weakness, are they going to hire me? We all all have weaknesses, but they too should be stated in a positive term. And I always kind of laugh and say my greatest strength sometimes is my biggest weakness. I'm very, very organized. Is it a strength? Definitely. But can it be a weakness? You bet. If I am not careful, I can get in a habit of worrying too much about everything being organized and not enough about getting the work done at hand. So I have to make sure that it's okay if everything's not perfectly lined up. I can still get my work done. So, you need to think about it because they will ask you. I had a friend that just went on an interview and she said the employer sat there and snapped his fingers the whole time and said, give me 5 of your greatest strengths. And flipped and said, okay, now 5 of your greatest weaknesses. And she said, I do this for a living. And she said, I'm HR. She said, I do it for a living. And she said, it still threw me. She said, 1, because he sat there and snapped his finger, and 2, he's just a quick, rapid recession, just tell me. So make sure that you have, most employers don't do that, I promise you so, but make sure you do have a couple of your greatest strengths, a couple of your greatest weaknesses, and those strengths and weaknesses will change as you get more experience. A lot of times, sometimes our greatest weakness starting a new job is, I've got a 2-year degree, I just finished it, but I have to be honest, I don't have any work experience in it. Don't leave it there. I don't have a lot of work experience in my field, but that could be a good thing for you. I've got the latest technology, I'm eager to learn, I don't have any bad habits, I'm not coming from another organization where you're going to have to retrain me, I'm ready to start fresh. So don't leave a negative as a negative, build on it and make it a positive. And again, that, when we go into interview, an employer, we might think an employer has a preconceived idea about us, a preconceived liability. I go into interview with an employer, chances are a lot of people that I'd interview with today are probably going to be younger than I am. So they might look at me and think, she's getting kind of old. Or I might think, they're going to look at me and think, she's getting kind of old, why would we want to hire her? Well, if that's really what I'm thinking, then as an interviewee, when you come to the end of the interview and they say, is there anything you want to tell me? That's when I need to address that and say, you might be wondering at my age why I'm applying for this job now. I'm applying because I still very much want to work and I have no intention of leaving the field. And my kids are grown and they're raised and they're out of the house. I no longer have those daycare issues. I'm here to work. I need this work to kind of feel productive. So I kind of address it in a positive manner before the employer ever says anything about it. That's part of asking questions. So they're going to ask you questions, but you need to have some questions for them as well too. They're going to expect it. And if you've done your homework, you should have some questions. If you're really interested in the job, you should have some questions. This goes back to interviewing them. Now, you don't want to ask them 50 million questions, and probably within the first interview there are 3 questions that should never be asked by the applicant, even though those are probably the 3 most important questions to us, and that's salary, benefits, and time off, whether it's vacation or sick leave. Those are considered me questions, and after all, we're here for the employer. So unless they bring up those subjects, it's best if you don't during the first interview. Now, during the second interview, there's not a problem. Questions that you could ask the employer, and again, these vary, but these are some that you might think about, is what are the opportunities for growth? Are there any opportunities for advancement? If I'm starting in an entry-level position, do I want to stay entry-level? Hopefully, I'll be able to be promoted and moved up. But what's it going to take for me to be promoted and moved up? What is the retention rate of people in this position? It's a good question to ask. And if they say, really most people who come into this job stay here for about a year and then they're promoted, perfect, great. I know I'm going to be here a year, and if I do a good job, chances are I'll be promoted too. If the employer says, we just can't figure it out, everybody starts in this position, they're gone within 3 to 6 months. We've probably had a dozen people in the last 2 years. That should be ding, 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 ding. There should be little red flags and bells going off all the way around you. If they've had that many people in that short of time frame in this position, something's not right. So again, it goes back to you interviewing them. you know, is this someplace that I would want to come in and work? What are your expectations for new hires? Can you describe the work environment? Is there any way I could see where I would be working? Most employers are more than happy to show you where you'll be working. Trust me, if they offer you the job and you accept, they want you to be happy, and as much information as they can give you before they make the decision, before you make the decision, it's better for both parties. So, you know, if you want to see where you'll be working, who you'll be working with, ask them, you know, can I have a tour of the facility, or at least can I see where I'll be working? Again, you need to find maybe 5 or 6 questions that you feel are viable questions that have nothing to do with benefits, vacation, or time off, and be prepared. Write them down. Because if you're like most people, if you go in for an interview and you think, okay, I need to remember to ask them this, this, and this, the interview lasts 45 minutes, they've given you all kinds of information, and all of a sudden you forget what questions you're going to ask. They don't know that you had them thought out. Have them written out. Say, you know, I do have a couple questions. Do you mind? I actually wrote them out. Again, as an employer, I'm thinking, this person must really be interested. This person must really have some initiative. They've taken the time to write those questions down. So write your questions down. That way you don't forget them. You show some initiative, some enthusiasm on your part for the employer. So make sure you get those questions written down. Other sections or other parts of the interview, when you're in the interview, you know, we talk about communicating verbally, we talk about communicating non-verbally. You need to watch your posture in the interview, you need to watch your facial expressions, you need to smile on occasion. Let the employer know that you want to be here. Remember good eye contact. All of this is part of the nonverbal communications, but some things that you need to do verbally. If you do ask good questions, and this is part of the listening, you know, sometimes I've gone into an interview and they'll say, you know, if you don't mind, just hold off and wait and ask your questions after we get done. Okay. So that tells me I need to not ask any questions till the end of the interview. So don't get a fourth of the way through the interview and say, oh, by the way, can I ask a question when they've just told me not to. So that's part of the listening. But also learn to ask just one question at a time. So if they say, you know, some might say, you know, if any time during this you have any questions at all, feel free to ask whenever. And as they're saying something, it kind of generates a thought. And you can say, you know, when they take a breath, don't interrupt them. Say, you know, I do have a question. Would you mind further explaining that point? So, but just ask one question at a time. Don't ramble off 6 or 7 questions. Give them an opportunity to answer your question. Make sure you answer your questions clearly and concisely. Again, know when to end your interview. Again, I had an employer call, and she said, Lisa, she said more often than not, she said applicants will talk themselves out of a job. They will do very good, they'll answer the question, but they just don't know when to stop talking. Don't drag your response on and on and on. Make sure you can state it clearly and concisely. If the interviewer at any time makes a mistake either in any of your information or the pronunciation of your name, it's okay to correct them. And you can do it with a little bit of diplomacy. You know, my maiden name was a very difficult name. Just say, you know, actually my name's pronounced. And they will appreciate it. They don't want to call you by the wrong name. They'll appreciate it. Or if they say, you know, I see that you have a one-year certificate, when in fact you have a 2-year associate, you might say, actually my program was a 2-year program and I finished the 2-year program. So if they do make a mistake, make sure that you correct them. Describe your qualifications and experiences positively at all times. Don't talk negative about former employers, former co-workers, former instructors. It needs to be very positive, because if you start kind of bad-mouthing other employers, then they're going to wonder, what are they going to say about me when they leave here? Probably my biggest thing, is do not cut the interviewer off. And sometimes if they say something and I get a thought without thinking, I think I need to get that thought out before I forget it. I need to kind of sit back, take a breath, and let them finish their statement or let them finish their question, and then speak. So don't cut them off. You know, that really, I know I do that, and it really isn't the appropriate thing to do. You watch your grammar. You know, please, thank you, excuse me, could you please repeat that? We all kind of get a little bit slack when we're talking with our friends or our family, but in the interview, they're listening. 25% of their decisions going to be based on your communication skills. Watch your grammar, watch your rate of speech. Use positive phrases, use phrases like, I know I can. Without a doubt, you know, it might take a little bit of training, but I know I've got the skills or the education to do this job. Watch the phrases, not, well, you know, maybe, I think maybe I could do that. You know I could do it. Is it going to take me a little bit of time? It might, but I've got the education, I've got the experience, and I want to learn, so I know I will be able to do it. It's all in how you phrase things. Closing the interview. Once you get through with the interview and you've exhausted all your questions and they've exhausted all their questions, you know, a lot of employers are now asking you if you say you know a certain software program, if you know you're familiar with a different type of computer. Some of them are saying, hey, you know, we've got a short test in here. Don't be surprised if part of your interview is actually a test. There's a test attached to it. Whether it's, you know, developing something graphically, if you've got a graphic design, or, you know, if you're an administrative assistant, they might ask you to take a short typing test. So, because employers are now wanting proof that you can do what you say you can do, because they've got so much writing on this decision, they're putting more time and effort and energy into the front part, the interview part, instead of hiring the wrong candidate. So don't be surprised if part of your interview there isn't some kind of maybe a test attached to it as well. But after they've exhausted their questions and you've exhausted your questions, it's okay to ask them, can you please tell me when you hope to have a decision made? And if they say, you know, we hope to have it made by the end of next week, would it be all right if I contacted you at that time? And they might say, yeah, it's not a problem, or they might say, no, don't worry about it, we will send a letter or we will contact you. If they say we will contact you, then as tempted as we are sometimes to call them, we need to be patient and wait for them to contact us. But a lot of times employers will say, yeah, it's not a problem, just go ahead and give me a call. Also, at that point, at some point in the interview process, it might not be the first interview, they might actually call you in for a second interview, or it might be during the first interview, they might say, you know, we've really been very impressed, we're ready to make our decision, we'd like to go ahead and offer you this position. Would you accept? Well, before you say yes, and if they haven't brought up the salary, now's the time for you to bring up the salary. Again, I know I said not to discuss it during the first interview, and you shouldn't, but if it reaches this point and they say, you know, we'd really like to offer you the job, do you think you'd be interested? Then you can bring up the salary. And you can just ask them, you know, I'm very much interested, but would it be possible if we discuss salary at this point? And chances are they're going to discuss salary. But when they're discussing salary and you're writing everything down, there are other things you need to consider other than just strictly the salary, as far as should I accept this offer or not. Some of the other things that you might want to accept or might want to consider are benefits, retirement, dress. You know, I'm kind of a casual khaki kind of person, and I notice everybody else in the office are in suits. Am I going to be required to wear a suit? Travel. How far is it going to take me to get, you know, it took me 45, 50 minutes to get here. Okay, if it takes me 45 minutes there and 45 minutes home, that's an hour and a half that I've lost every day. Am I willing to give that up? Or, you know, am I going to have to relocate? Is this just kind of a training ground, and then they're going to expect me to relocate someplace else? There's a whole lot of things that you need to be considering before you make that decision on whether or not to accept this position. And because most interviews are lengthy, and because there's a lot of information both ways, sometimes it's hard to, on the spot, make that decision. Yes, I want this job. No, I don't want this job. It's all right. It's totally acceptable if you say, you know, I'm very interested in this position. Everything you've told me today is exactly what I was hoping to hear. I know I could do a good job for you. I know this is what interests me. But would it be all right if I took 24 hours to think about it? Could I please go home, look at it on paper, make my decision, and call you tomorrow? Again, most employers would prefer you do that as opposed to jump right in, make the decision, only to get home and say, you know, I really don't want this position. I'm going to have to call and rescind my offer at this time. So if your interview does escalate to that point, and at the end of the interview they are discussing salary, they are discussing benefits, they have offered you the job, it's okay. You don't have to make your decision right then and there. It is okay to ask them for 24 hours. You know, or if you've interviewed on a Friday, ask them, can you call them first thing Monday morning and let them know your decision. Chances are it's not going to be a problem with the employers at any time, because they're going to want to make sure that not only do you want to be there, but they want to make sure that you're the right candidate and that you really want to come in and that you're going to be a part of their team. And it goes back to, you know, that expected reasonable time that you're going to stay. If I'm an employer and I hire a candidate, I'd rather have them take 24 or 48 hours, think about it, get back to me with their decision, and know that when they walk through that door, they're going to want to stay at this office for longer than 6 months. So again, the interview, we do mock interviews within the Placement and Career Development office. So if any time, or if you want additional information on interviews, I've got quite a bit more information. If you'd like any more information, please feel free to contact me or stop by my office in C207. Thank you.